here we are. I'm Tom Osman, and this is Whatever Comes Next, the podcast where I explore the world of underground and independent music making. And on today's episode, I am talking with Seattle, Washington singer-songwriter Robert Deeble, who is promoting his latest album, The Space Between Us, which you can buy on Bandcamp, on vinyl and CD, and will be available on all streaming services from February the 6th. And Roberts is a understated and delicate music, but very beautifully put together. And all of this music in its construction is underpinned by his very elegant singing and guitar playing, which definitely reeled me in from my first listen to this record. So I'm going to play one of the singles off the record, Orphan Song, at the end of this episode, with a small clip coming up before the interview where we talk about the political backdrop that influenced the making of this album, the importance of community for Robert, and both in terms of his life, but for the musical world that he's in general, the literary influences of this record and some of his other writing, and yeah, a bit of a conversation about Bandcamp that was quite interesting, with Robert being a big advocate for Bandcamp and the support that they've had for him and for other independent artists. So, given my interest in various different topics of the music business, that was an interesting take for me. And talking about valuable platforms for artists, hey, I'm on Ampwall, and I have been investigating various other music that is available on Ampwall. So I'm going to put a link in the description, not only of The Space Between Us and Robert's music, but I'm going to put a link to my music on Ampwall. Yay! Which is also on Bandcamp as well. So there's that too. And you can follow me on all social media at Tom Osmond Sounds. You can check out my music at tomosmondsounds.com. There is something quite exciting that's going on that I don't want to talk about just yet, but maybe in the next episode or two, I'm going to talk about that. But I think for now, there is nothing further for me to say. But Robert Deeble, take it away.
Little apple tree planted by a front door down in Cooper Creek, Virginia. And with the turn of leaves, she don't love me anymore. And all these memories, they linger. Pleasant, don't you leave me for another song. We've got little mouths to feed, and our hearts are...
Tom, pleasure to meet you.
Pleasure to meet you, Tom.
Are you at home or in your studio, or in fact both?
Both. This is my rehearsal studio, or glorified gear closet, and sometimes the laundry room.
Okay, multi-purpose.
Yes.
So thinking about all of the equipment that you've got and logistics, how long have you been in this space for, in this location?
Well, I've been in Seattle since 2003, and we were lucky enough to purchase a home when, back when you could still do that. And so my dad and I actually built out the bottom unit specifically to be a creative space, rehearsal space, and that kind of thing. And so it's helped me maintain that part of my life in an otherwise very busy, compartmentalized life with lots of different things.
Yeah. And in terms of that compartmentalized life, how much of those different compartments are music related?
Well, I don't know how to put a percentage on it, but the music's always been my heart, and it's always been a part of what I've done, or what I do. And so that goes back, I think my first album was in 1994, so a long time. But I learned along the way that in order to continue making music the way I wanted to make it, I had to have other irons in the fire and other ways of making a living to make that sustainable. And so I've wanted music to be a sustainable part of my life. I am not the most prolific songwriter. I put records out every 6 to 7 years, and but I'm always thinking about them and working on them, and it's just take a very long time between publishing.
Well, on that topic of taking time to release your album, so I understand that The Space Between Us was a project that you started in or around 2020. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah,
And
that's about
so
right.
was that kind of in its origin, a child of the COVID pandemic, or was that not really so directly relating to its origins?
Yeah, no, we can start there for sure. Now there were a couple of tunes that predated COVID because they were compositions that I wrote upon assignment with various things I'm involved in, like the Bushwick Book Club here in Seattle. We write sometimes a song about a particular book that's assigned. So some of those have been published as demos, just acoustic demos. But really, when you look at the album, the song COVID Moon kind of starts the process of the new album. And that literally was written on the first day of the pandemic when basically we got the news that it was a pandemic. Don't go outside, don't talk to people, don't, find your core community and stick with them. And so literally I was in the bedroom upstairs just trying to make sense of all that, and I had my guitar. I was messing around, and a dear friend of ours was in the living room hanging out with my family, and I just created this instrumental that was a very bizarre time signature, and I ended up making a quick little recording of it, and that kind of started the process of the album. So that was actually written on the very first day of the pandemic.
And I wouldn't necessarily say that the album is overtly political, but would it be accurate to say that some of the songs were shaped by the political climate?
Yeah, so the way that I look at politics, it's a little bit like how Leonard Cohen talked about, if everything is burning well in your life, then the things that you're doing, that's the ash. And I see politics as a natural extension of, who I am as a person, not something that I don't ever go to politics first. Politics is an expression of my heart and my values. And of course, it's an imperfect expression, right? But I think it would be literally inauthentic to not respond to things that were happening politically. It's not it's not my basis in which I write, but it's a natural expression of, it's one of many natural expressions of who I am. And so I've never really considered myself a political songwriter. And I found that when I leaned into this on this record, it was tricky for me because I never want to write something that's so oriented to time and place that it loses its resonance beyond that. And maybe that's because I write so long in between albums that I have to think of legacy when I'm writing, because the next thing doesn't just happen the next year. So I'm always thinking of how can whatever I'm being inspired by, what are the deeper themes of that can last over time.
Yeah, I think that's quite, even outside of sort of creative pursuits, it's kind of a relatable feeling to have. Like, I go through phases with current affairs and the news where I sort of get really heavily, deeply into it, and I'm reading so much about what's going on. And then I sort of get burnt out. And I'm in a phase of burnout at the moment where I feel like I just can't bring myself to engage with so much that's going on at the moment. But then I sometimes think to myself, if I go and read history, for example, I'm going to get a lot of insights that would be relevant in the present. And in some ways, maybe that can be more valuable than sort of getting into the weeds of current political happenings. I mean, I guess if it's sort of within your local community and it's things that you can affect directly, maybe it's a little bit different. But otherwise, it sort of feels sometimes that it's not the best use of my emotional energy and mental energy to get caught up in everything that's going around in the world at the present.
Gosh, yeah, it's such. I mean, you're speaking about such a delicate balance because the burnout or the sadness or the depression that comes from being too closely aligned with all that is so real. And then the opposite side of that is the complacency that we fall into when things are happening around us and we just don't want to look at it, right? And I'm always trying to find that balance of how am I oriented to what's really happening around me, but not so taken up in it that, well, I guess the title of the record's a good example. Like you can get so focused on a particular tree that you lose the forest, right? And I think artists, that works well when you're writing a tune, but it not basically in any other, you know, facility. But so I think a lot of what I have said politically on this album really reflects the forest. I think there's a lot of scary things happening in our country that I do feel honestly terrified around, and I'm not just leaning into liberal rage or something like that. I think there's very real reasons to be deeply concerned about what's happening with us. At the same time, one of the greatest tragedies in all this is the polarization and the breakdown of our relationships, which is kind of where the album speaks to. It goes past, hey, I think this is wrong. I think this is what's happening in our world politically is just morally wrong. It goes past that and says, here's the result. We are losing connection with one another. We're losing a dialogue with one another. And it's important to have differentiation in a dialogue. You know, so I lament the fact that we can't seem to have a reasonable dialogue with a differing party.
Mm.
You know, it's all talking points.
Does that feel like something which has got significantly worse over
Yeah.
some measurable period of
Yes.
time?
Yes. Absolutely.
And when can you sort of pinpoint a moment or a period where things start to go in that direction, or do you think it was sort of edging that way for a long time?
Yeah, I think that's out of my wheelhouse. I just kind of noticed it happening. It felt like to me that one side of the U.S. Was given something they wanted, but they didn't recognize what was asked of them in return. And it felt spiritual to me that what was asking of them in return was complete loyalty to that spirit. And with that loyalty loses the ability to have kind of independent thought or even a gradual breakdown of the deeper values that folks may have had. And that's when I get into these conversations, that's where I try to go, is not the specifics, but the deeper values. Do you care about human dignity? Do you care about human life? I've always assumed that you did. So how do we hold what's happening now with those values versus, you know, left, right, or center?
Yeah, I mean that seems like a constructive, positive way of looking at things because you're less likely to sort of, I hate to use the word, but like trigger people with particular references to people or concepts or movements that they either align with or don't align with, but more about underlying values.
Oh my God, yeah. And then it's like, we have these trigger words that we use that just immediately shut other people down to they no longer can listen, you know. And, like I use, like the word, you know, concentration camp. That shuts people down right away. And so I'll use the word detainment camp, but then I'll move into have you looked at them? They are concentrated in a cruel and undignified way. And these are not, the majority of the people in these camps are not, violent criminals or people with criminal records whatsoever. They are basically like you and me. And the consequence of whatever infraction they had doesn't match. It's cruel and unkind and undignified, and if it can happen to them, it can happen to you. So I'm not saying that the same thing in 1930s is happening again exactly, but it is very, very similar in the way it began. And if I can hold, okay, maybe the same thing is not happening exactly the way you've read it in history, but right now we don't know where your gardener went. We don't know where the cook went. We don't know where the leaf blower went. There's no accountability. So what's to say that won't happen? The worst possible thing. It's already bad enough that somebody has been banished because they sought refuge with you. They sought refuge in your country. And for whatever reason, your values had been shifted to despise with contempt these people that did no harm to you.
Mm,
You
yeah,
know, by calling them all drug traffickers and cartels, that then paints a picture where people can shut down and like, oh yeah, serves them right. No, these are
yeah,
not these are not the people by and large that the administration is going after. I think there's like 5% is what I've read of serious, violent criminals being picked up. If that's what they were doing, they would not have undermined the policy that stood in all administrations for I don't know how many years, but there was a very distinct policy, immigration policy, that there was a priority of people that had serious violent offenses would be the priority for deportation. They would be the first in line, the focus for immigration. That was undermined on day one. They removed that policy the very first week of the Trump presidency, and they replaced it with a quota system,
mm,
which means that, you get bonuses basically if you grab anyone. And so the low hanging fruit is what is being targeted, not criminal enterprises, which would require a lot more coordination with local law enforcement. But we're not seeing that. So
yeah.
anyway, not to get too far into politics, how do we get here?
Yeah, I didn't mean to lead you too far down that road, but no, I think that was a very interesting insight, and it's scary, even from where I am on the other side of the world. Like you say, you can't say that lessons from history are playing out exactly the way they were in the past, but you also don't want to be completely ignorant of things that happened in the past that seem to have some kind of parallels. Moving away a bit from the political side of things, and I do want to get on to talking about the music of the album and your music in general, but I also wanted to touch on something else that you brought up, and I'd read in the press release, and I was curious about in general because the term community has been coming up more and more when I've been interviewing people and thinking sometimes in the sense of underground music and DIY music and the importance of community in that sense. And you mentioned at a certain point in our conversation so far about connections, and I saw in your press release talk about community. So I'm wondering for you whether on the musical side or just in general, how important is that concept of community to you?
I think over the last 15 years, relationships in general have become the lens in which I look at pretty much everything. It's how I look at philosophy, it's how I look at theology, um, and in many ways, it's how I look at the arts and music. That's what is really so amazing about being human is our ability for relationship, and it's how we thrive. You know, this is what was so hard about COVID, right? We started to decompensate when our relationships were removed from, or we didn't have the access to relationships like we used to. And I'm very, very cognitive of the fact that I might start a piece of art, but it doesn't begin and end with me. The fact that I invite other people into that process creates this very beautiful thing that happens, whether it's the producer, like Rich Rodinsky, that has such a wonderful role on this album, or it's the various musicians that come in and have the freedom to put their own mark on things. That's such a lovely thing. And I think I'm probably a little more sensitive to it, given that for whatever reason, I never ended up being a big band guy. I didn't grow up, rehearsing every Saturday with my buddies, and we just had this thing together, a band of brothers or whatever. For whatever reason, that wasn't how music happened for me. And part of that, I think, is the fact that by living in an area that is so difficult to live in, cost of living, you don't have the luxury, or at least I don't, of just getting together every week with your bandmates and figuring out what to do next, having lunch and time with each other. They are all scattered around playing with other bands and figuring out how they're going to make a living, and so are you. Now, if I lived in the Midwest, that would be different. But I so value the time that I have with the people that pour their hearts into what I do. It means a tremendous amount. And so when we are playing together or when we are rehearsing together, there's just a deep joy of connection that I feel, that I don't want to take that for granted. And that's just one little aspect to, I think, your question around community. And I speak of that in the song Forest from the Tree. And I reference, that community in that idea, using the idea of a forest and its root system being like a community that makes you stronger.
And you brought up a little bit earlier having written songs that came out of, I think you said it was a book group that you've got, or it's a group where you read a book and then you write based on the books you've been reading. And I
Yeah.
understand that at least a couple of the songs, including The Forest from the Tree, are inspired by different literature. So how much has that been a component of your songwriting over the years?
So that has been a signature piece of my songwriting over the years. I would say going all the way back to the first album. Um, it's it's one of I used to joke when people ask you what kind of music you were. I said literary folk pop. Um, so I think one of my greatest songwriting achievements in my mind was taking the Brothers Karamazov and seeing if I could write a summary of it in a song under 5 minutes or 6 minutes. And that's not on this album. That's on a previous album. But
Which album is
so
that on?
it was on an album called 13 Stories. And it's one of my favorite songs because I think I really nailed it in terms of the basic themes of that book, which I adore.
Yeah.
But
It's funny, just an incidental little thing. I love that book as well, and my parents gave me that, and I remember they dedicated the dates on it. I think they gave it to me in 2007, and when I finally read it, it was about 2014. So it took me a long time to get around to it. I thought it was amazing,
yeah.
but it's just kind of funny. Every time I looked at it, I was like, I've had this book for a long time.
Oh, it's such a beautiful book, and I think it inspired me in a lot of different ways. I love the fact that in the theme of that book, Alyosha's mentor says it's don't stay in the monastery. Don't don't just be your individualized world with you and God or whatever it is. Go into the world. Be amongst other people. Be amongst people that are different than you. Be something that's light, salt and light in the world. And I think that was a beautiful theme that Dostoevsky put into that story, along with all the differences that Alyosha falls into with say his brother. That classic argument they have in the book. Dostoevsky allows the brother to win the argument, but that's not the real point, right?
Yeah.
And so, kind of going back to what we talked to before around politics and stuff, it's not. I don't carry a lot of value in the debate. I carry more value in the relationship. So, beautiful book. You got me going down another rabbit hole on that one.
So, from a sort of practical point of view, because I writing lyrics is something that I find particularly difficult in terms of marrying words to music.
Mm-hmm.
So, for you, in terms of your kind of songwriting craft, is there something? Is there something quantitatively different about, or maybe quantitative is the wrong word, qualitatively different about going from a literary basis, or for you, songwriting, sort of has a plethora of different ways that it can be formed?
It does have a plethora of different ways. Some songs actually start with the melody or the chordal structure, and other songs literally start with the spoken word. And those are always the more interesting tunes that I find I end up coming away with. And I think they were a little more prominent in the first half of my career. Albums like Earthside Down and stuff really featured kind of that spoken word. Another good example is This Bar Has No One Left, the tune in a cigarette voice. That was written poetically first in ways that it was, pretty tricky for the music to follow the stanzas. And it basically, I was trying to resemble like an old snare drum with a very loose snares on the bottom, in the way that the phrasing sort of came across. And so those tunes get really interesting for me. It's hard to know how something is going to start, and I might have a lyrical idea that somehow hits me, and then I'll take that as far as I can, and then write music after the point. And other times, it'll work the other way around. Obviously, when it works the other way around, those end up being the more melodically pleasing tunes. Sometimes more, those tunes might go a little further because they follow a little more of a pop context. But
Well, from that perspective, then, of thinking about the various different ways that you construct songs, I'm curious then if we pick out a specific song from the latest album, one of my favorite songs on the record, Not on Your Team, which I think has got one of the things I would say about the album in general, I think you've got very elegant use of instrumentation. It's quite sort of an understated record. There's nothing too sort of explosively over the
brash,
top.
yeah.
Brash, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
but actually when you're listening to the album, there are a lot of really beautiful elements to it. And I guess some of that's to do with your songwriting, some of that's to do with the production of Richard Insky, some of that's to do with the players that you brought in. But if we take that particular track, what can you tell me about the way that that was put together?
Well, it's an interesting track. It was inspired by literature as well. Um, and it has kind of a personal connotation. But I was challenged by a friend to see if I could write a tune on a minor prophet in the Old Testament. And I picked Amos. And then I did a literary study of Amos, or spiritual study, however you want to look at it. And I loved how this is sort of an under appreciated book in religious circles, because it speaks around it's kind of an ancient version of Bob Dylan's Masters of War, or God on Your Side, which is tongue in cheek to God's really not on your side sometimes when you think he is what Dylan was trying to say, I think. But that's exactly what Amos was trying to say. And I found it just really powerful in light of where we are today, that so many people of religious backgrounds have championed a politic that is cruel and unkind to people that are vulnerable. And it unfortunately undermines the goodness, I feel, of those people that now, there's a complicitness in that. And it's sad to me, not only what's happening to the vulnerable, but also what's happening to those that are sort of denying this good part of themselves. So I took basically the first verse was written about Amos himself. In his protest, he was basically a protest prophet. He protested against his religious government by the way they were treating the poor and vulnerable. They were at the time the most powerful government in the region. And he basically said, this is not good, what you're doing. And no one listened to him, and they continued to do what they were going to do. But his words ends up becoming canonized. The beautiful poetry in the center section of the song, which is basically the chorus, those are basically his words. Amos was also a poet, and it's just absolutely stunning, the poetry that is in that book. So I practically lifted that poetry and worked it and massaged it in a way that could work in the song. And the last, the middle verse is about my own perception of my own environment, political environment, and the con artistry that our current president has pulled over the people. And the last verse is, I think, very sad to me, but it basically talks about how people of faith, not all of them, but a large portion of them in our country, have been duped. And the light that they, supposedly wanted to bring to the world is now dim by, being part of something so dark, you know. And there's some interesting prophecies out there. I'm not sure how I feel about them, about people getting duped at other points of time in history. But it's a bit of a maybe a Johnny Cash tune in a way, as it alludes to some of these apocalyptic literature ideas. But again, I stay with the literary roots of these themes, the things that we can all take value out of, or we can all take some goodness out of, not just people that maybe read, religious literature, that kind of stuff. But so yeah, if you look at this new album, you've got everything from the Book of Amos. You have Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451. You have this lovely little story that was depicted in a graphic novel on the Carter family, A.P. Carter and Sarah Carter. And so there's a lot of just literary themes on the record that kind of carry on that long-term theme of mine in a lot of my records.
And in terms of the players, you brought up not coming from a background of having a band necessarily, but you've also mentioned having relationships with people, maybe musicians that you've nurtured over the years. I mean, you didn't use exactly those words, but in terms of the players or the people that you're collaborating with outside of Richard Insky, how did that come together with the collaborators? Were these some of these people you'd worked with quite a lot, some of these for the first time?
Yeah, actually. So let's go a little bit further back, and we'll talk about how Rich got involved, because that's a really important relationship. But this album is kind of a marriage of a relationship with Rich, but also my string players in Seattle. Rich reached out to me probably 10 years ago and said, I would like to do a record with you. What do you think? And I couldn't fathom the idea at the time. Him being in Cincinnati and me being in Seattle, it just seemed just unimaginable. And we had a lovely conversation about the possibility, and I think it ended up talking about Pet Sounds and Brian Wilson. But we both kept it on the back of our minds of, if there was a way to do this, we'd like to do this. And so fast forward, I was working on an album in Portland called Heart Like Feathers with Dylan McGarrick from Badman Recording. And we wanted a particular ambient guitar track, and I thought of Rich again, and I reached out to him and said, well, what would you think of contributing to this one track? And he said, I'm on it. And we had a track almost instantaneously, and we loved it. It was great. And that was the kind of the next sort of connection that I had with Rich. And then in 2018, I was recording Beloved here in Seattle. And most of my albums, going all the way back to the first album, have had strings. And usually it's a combination of me, painfully trying to put something together, or me playing with string players, and we all figure out something that ends up becoming a score. But it's never as intentional as it was on this record. And so when we were recording the title track to Beloved, I thought of Rich, and I'm like, I'd like to get something a little more intentional on this this song. And whatever we had come up with didn't really seem to move the ball forward. And so we reached out to Rich, and he created a score for that song. And when I got it back, I was floored. It was so gorgeous. And it really started a new chapter with me and Rich. Rich and I, sorry. So from that point forward, as I was working on different song ideas long before this album was, conceptualized, I would demo something with my string players here in Seattle, and I would reach out to Rich and say, here's something we're working on. What do you think? What would be some of your ideas for this? He would come back with a score. We would basically read that score, start playing it out live, and then the three of us would make some changes and additions to what Rich did in terms of maybe highlighting the vocals more, or making it less busy in certain parts. Send it back to Rich. He would make those corrections until finally we had a written score that basically was Rich's score, but we had had a role in it. And that started happening song after song after song. And eventually I called him up and I said, how about we do that record we talked about 10 years ago? And he said, let's do it. So long before I had decided to do the record with Rich or have him produce the record, he was our fifth Beatle. He was our Brian Wilson. He was basically our George Martin, helping to write some of these string scores. And then the other aspect of relationship with people is that going as far back as Beloved, I had just the honor of a really wonderful relationship with the cellist that just committed so much passion and energy to my music and was so available that I was able to do a lot of performing and such with her. And we gradually brought in a couple of different violists that would be generally available if we gave enough time, for gigs. And so it started to be a thing that this relationship between the three of us was really formulated around the strings. So Sidney Metcalf on cello, Alita Garrels on viola, and then a couple of other people that would step in. It's tricky with string players because they usually have their gigs lined up 2 to 3 months in advance. And so I had to be very efficient and very organized to be able to, be able to lock in a date with them. But that is the beginnings of how these relationships started. And because we had scores, we were able to be really efficient. We would book a date, we'd pull 2 rehearsals in, and we'd have the score, so we had something to work around, and then we invite different people to work with us, drummers and that kind of stuff. At some point, I brought back in an old player from Heart Like Feathers, Neil Vickers. Neil's an amazing instrumentalist, and he does everything. Back on Heart Like Feathers, he was my cellist, but in this particular scenario, he was playing all of Rich's guitar parts live and doing a lot of vocal harmonies, which this album has a lot of. So, and the other relationship that was important was Lacey Brown, who has been drumming for me live for years, but she's never been on one of my albums. And so I wanted to make sure that to invite her into that process. And again, kind of like the string players, I had to be really strategic with Lacey because she's plays with Damian Gerardo. That's her main sort of thing right now. And so I had to make sure I, line things up way in advance. And she's just great to work with. She's just really fun. She does a lot of the vocals on the album. And when we play live, she's not only drumming, but singing. And so, yeah. That's a little picture of some of the relationships that are around this album and performing live.
And so from that perspective then of the live aspect of your music, how consistent is it in terms of the lineup that you've got when you're playing live, and how often do you play?
I have a very large group of people that sub in on different things. So I have 2 different drummers that both sing, two different violists, two different cellists. Neil's always there. And so we'll land a date, and then it's like literally I'm looking at a spreadsheet of the date that the venue has and which available players can step in. And so it's a small circle in terms of, I try to use the same core group of people, but we have a lot of folks that step in and out to make it possible. And that's what allows me to locally play out this album exactly the way you hear it. And so we have this thing locally called One Small Orchestra. And that's most of the instrumentation that you hear on the record. A couple of different bass players as well. When I play out of state, I get very flexible with that. And I've always been a solo singer-songwriter, so I can adapt very easily when I play out of town. But because I've toured for many, many years, I often have people out of town that I can call up that will come play with me if I'm in a different state. And so I have a lot of band members that have moved to other parts of the country, and that sort of thing, that I will often bring some of those folks in. A lot of string players will step in for me in other parts of the country. So sometimes it's just me, and sometimes it's a small version of what you hear on the album.
And on the topic of the release of the album, so am I right to think that there was already a vinyl release that came out in the summer of last year, and then there's going to be a series of different releases coming out in 2026? Have I got that right?
You are right. You're absolutely right. And this is a very weird release schedule. We did it on purpose, and I don't know if it's going to make sense or if other people will follow this lead, but we wanted to change the way a release cycle worked, because we feel that the streaming environment has in many ways done some harm to independent musicians. And I'm not downplaying streaming or basically dissing on it. I'm basically saying that it has lowered our attention span to really take in an album. We take in a single maybe, and it's kind of throwaway because it's free. And we don't really truly appreciate, for those that really spend a lot of time, thought, and energy in crafting their work, we don't give that time of energy listening. That's one of the sad things that's happened in the modern streaming environment. Plus, we're listening to things that are so compressed now. So what we did in this particular release is, instead of releasing everything at once and allowing that streaming aspect to kind of demote all of the other aspects of a release, we put out the physical product first. And we put it out on the one platform that's still honoring artists in a truly meaningful way. Because, as you know, unless you are at a particular level of, massive amounts of streams, it's very, very, there's very little compensation in a streaming environment. And so we put out the full album on Bandcamp, and we put it out with them 3 months, 4 months early, so that literally they had propriety on this album. And so in order to get the full album, people would go and download it there or buy the vinyl, which we spent a lot of time pouring into, a lot of love into that vinyl. And it's a gorgeous rendition of this music, as well as the CD. And so we kind of gave them prominence because they have been so honoring to us over the years in all of the things that they do for, independent musicians. But we haven't, I personally haven't, boycotted the streaming environment. I just haven't given it my number one priority or focus.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a tricky balancing act, I think.
It is, yeah.
And am I right that the crowdfunding was partly involved for one or other of the physical releases? How did that come together?
Yeah, I think it's a really important thing for independent artists to engage their base, their fan base, in ways that are very meaningful to them. So even before Bandcamp had the album, that core fan base had the album first, and they were able to just directly fund the album from the very beginning. Now, I'm one of these guys that doesn't do a crowd fund until I'm basically 95% done with an album. The anxiety's too high for me. So the album was basically pretty much ready to go, and we were basically just gonna, start doing the manufacturing. But that crowd fund really helps, is a guide as well to how many units you're going to manufacture physical product.
Yeah.
So this all happens before the product becomes invisible in streaming. So crowdfund happened first, and then we delivered the crowdfund through Bandcamp, so that was the medium in which they received the downloads and that kind of thing. So we channeled everything through that. And then I should say Bandcamp was really sweet on all this as well. And they did a wonderful editorial piece, and that further expanded the album's reach. And from that point on, we did a formal release with digital, which would be all streaming platforms and YouTube. And basically, like any other, album release, we started with singles and allowed people to download or stream the single before the album, but also a full video single as well on YouTube. And we see all that really as marketing more than distribution. But so that's kind of how we've gone about it. So the album will formally release February 6th, and that will be the full album on all platforms. But we basically released 2 singles prior this year, and then people can still grab the full release off Bandcamp at any time.
Yeah.
So.
And talking about physical releases, I noticed something else on your Bandcamp page. You got this very elegant looking CD box set, which I think came out in 2021 and seems to be almost sold out on Bandcamp. Tell me about this. Oh
God, I love that. I love that thing. It is so much fun for me to put those together. I do them by hand.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, I am very lucky as an artist that I've always owned all of my material from the very first day. I have signed with several labels over the time, and really all but one of them I had complete access to the albums. And so, and then and the one that I didn't, I was just able to buy as much as I could from backstock and that kind of stuff. So years ago I came up with this idea, since I had all of these albums and feel really strongly about my discography. There's nothing about, I'm one of these guys that kind of lucky in that I still feel 100% around the stuff I wrote in 1994 to the stuff I wrote, last year. But I also pour a lot of energy and time into the physical product itself. The artwork has always been, a huge part of my artistic process, and a lot of these albums have some really elegant and beautiful artwork that features a lot of wonderful artists out there, community-wise. So I was able to kind of package all those things together as I moved along. As I put a new album out, I would sell the full box set, for $100 versus just the one album. And so people seem to have really loved that they not just buy the current album, but they'll buy the whole discography and go through the art books. And I did some fun things in them as well, as I went through about 30 years of archives of performance posters and created little mini postcards of those posters as kind of memoirs, and put them in the box set. And some of them are just, so a lot of people will buy it and they'll find a show that they were at, that they attended. But also there's a lot of, I joke about this a little bit, there's a lot of shows that I played with other artists that would eventually, literally blow up. And at the time we were just battling out in bars together on equal footing. But, you have these folks like M. Ward and stuff that are on the posters and things like that. And so you can kind of look back at the history and some of the really, interesting people that I've had the chance to play with, and where they've gone as well. So
yeah, that's a really nice added element.
Yeah, but I have a lot of fun with that. Every now and then I'll just take a day out and I'll create those boxes and stamp them and that kind of thing.
So, having talked about the album and talking about the box set and those both being available on Bandcamp, and having touched on shows as well, do you also have a separate website that you maintain? I guess you've got various social media that you use.
Yeah, so we have robertdeeble.com is the website, but we it's really a landing page that will basically, take you right into Bandcamp from that point on. And from time to time, depends on the era, that landing page is sometimes a little more involved. Sometimes we'll have a lot of different press kits, or I used to have a tour journal that I used to have on that. But these days it's all pretty simple and just doesn't get you too lost in the weeds, just takes you to what's happened musically. And I think partly, there's so much going on social media wise that I just haven't felt the need to have as much of a .com empire.
Yeah, no, I can totally understand that. And having touched on live performances, do you have any specific dates in the pipeline in terms of shows, or any other notable dates apart from the release of the record?
We are trying to land a date right now in Portland and Eugene. It's back to back. And there has been some talk about returning to Cincinnati to do a date there. And those are the two irons in the fire. Along with, anytime I fly out to anywhere for any reason, I play a gig. It's that simple. If someone flies me out to New York to hang out with them, I will play a gig. And it's as simple as I go on social media and say, I'm going to be in Denver around this time. Who would like to do a house show? And someone inevitably will come forward and say, I'd love for you to play my home. And I'll say, great. I need a small amplifier and 40 people, and we'll set up a Cash App and have people confirm ahead of time. It's easier on the guests or the hosts when they do that. And that's a lot of how I communicate with people, and it's a very intimate way of getting to know people, and that's something I love. And so a lot of times that'll just be solo, but if there's somebody in that area that I've toured with or played with, I'll invite them to come do some of the string parts, or play bass or that kind of thing. So I'm really nimble that way. And sometimes it's a matter of like a fly out to see my family, and I will figure out a gig on Saturday or Sunday night in town or a town nearby, and that usually takes care of my airfare and all that kind of stuff, and is tremendously enjoyable for me. Other times people will reach out and say, I don't know if you're planning on being in Pennsylvania anytime, but would you come play my house? I'm like, sure, let's make it happen. You get 40 people in a room. I'll fly out on a weekend. We'll make it happen.
The extended community in action.
Exactly. Yeah. We didn't really touch on this, but we talked about community in the band and community in general. But I really love creating community with the people that have followed me over the years. I don't see them as followers, or I don't see them as fans. I see them as friends, and I love to get to know them, and even when they're very different than I am. So I love finding those core areas that we share, and so that's a component of what I do as well. Maybe that's not possible on a certain level. I don't know. I've never gotten there, but I love it. I love that it is possible at the level I'm at and enjoy being at.
Yeah, well, I think that's a really beautiful perspective.
Thank you.
Well, Robert, thank you very much for your time, for your insights, and it was great to talk about your music. And yeah, I've really enjoyed the latest record, and I've enjoyed listening to your other music as well. It's a beautiful musical world that you create.
Oh, thank you. It's been really lovely talking to you and getting to know you as well.
Little apple tree planted by a front door down in Cooper Creek, Virginia. With a turn of leaves, she don't love me anymore. And all these memories, they linger. Pleasant, don't you leave me for another song. We've got little mouths to feed, and our hearts are on the run. If you stay with me, you know I'll sing along. Oh, pleasant, don't you leave me for another orphan song. So can't you see the branches of this tree with all the fruits of our labor? Could you follow me into the harvesting? These songs hang low, sweet and tender. Pleasant, don't you leave me for another song. We've got little mouths to feed, and our hearts are on the run. If you stay with me, you know I'll sing along. Oh, pleasant, don't you leave me for another orphan song. La, 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 la. what would you say to me as the sun sets down in Cooper Creek, Virginia? Pleasant, don't you leave me for another song. We've got little mouths to feed, and our hearts are on the run. If you stay with me, you know I'll sing along. Oh, pleasant, don't you leave me for another orphan song.